A warm welcome to all our enthusiastic participants for joining us today. My name is Shreya Rania Chaudhary, and I will be your co host for this session, along with my colleague, Ms. Shivanshi Asthana. For all our new participants joining us today, Five Elements Sustainable Development Group is a consultancy and a collaborative network of institutional and individual partners committed to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Under the mentorship of our chairman, Mr. Arun Amritham, we are on a mission to foster collaboration and consummate synergies to achieve impact at the nexus of smart cities, smart villages, renewable energies, essential technologies for development, impact finance, and consulting. The Gender Justice India webinar series is brought to you by Five Elements SDG, where we bring on thought leaders, policy practitioners, and subject matter experts from around the world to engage with and discuss a plethora of issues related to the gendered nature of society, polity, culture, and economy. Before I introduce our esteemed guest for this evening, let me humbly reiterate a few house rules. Respected participants are requested to keep their microphones muted and encouraged to type their comments and questions in the chat box. We will be taking it up during the Q&A session following the presentation. For your information, this webinar will be recorded for our Five Elements SDG YouTube channel. For discussing the very crucial topic of gender inequality in the access to COVID vaccines, we are very graciously joined today by Ms. Nilanjana Das, who is a research associate working on this issue with SAMA, the resource group on women and health, working on training research, advocacy, and knowledge creation. An alumnus of the Biju Patnaik Institute of Technology and the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, Ms. Das is an accomplished public health professional who has previously worked with the Public Health Resource Network on health equity in tribal areas of Chhattisgarh, India. Her interests lie in primarily healthcare, her interests lie in primary healthcare, patient rights, health and wellness centers, nutrition rehabilitation centers, reproductive rights, and violence against women and refugees. It is an honor to host you, Ms. Das. The floor is all yours.
Uh, Thank you, Shreya. I am grateful to the entire team of Five Elements for inviting me today to speak on this topic. And I am going to, without any further ado, begin. Let me know if everyone is able to see my screen. One second.
Yes.
This topic has been something that I have been working closely with my present organization, Sama Resource Group for Women in Health. And before that, as Shreya mentioned, I was working in Chhattisgarh. So I will be talking from the perspective of both my organizations and experiences that have brought me so far. So let us begin with a little bit about COVID-19 and the lockdown that happened last year, because this lockdown, which was imposed last year, we saw the repercussions on various vulnerable and marginalized groups. And it brought a key aspect in front all of us, that the responses to any pandemic, not just like Ebola and Zika, but even COVID-19 has a gendered response. It's not a gender neutral response. So while we saw that there have been heightened inequities because of various reasons, be it the gender, sexuality, disability, caste, ethnicity, there were cases of stigma, discrimination against religious minorities, transgender communities, and one of the key factors that was brought forth was that vulnerable and marginalized groups were left completely exposed. especially in this neoliberal era where privatization has been growing and public health systems and public systems have been weakened and dismantled over the years. So one of a small quote that I would like to share from our study with People's Health Movement, which I'm also part of, was we had interviewed several vulnerable groups and people accessing both uh, essential services, be it non-communicable services. One of the transgender person with whom I had spoken in December last told us how people from their community had actually fled from the city of the metro cities of Chhattisgarh to other bigger cities like Bombay, Delhi, because there was no provision for them to work there. The buses or the usual ways of how they would usually earn money was completely brought to a halt because of the lockdown. And the moment there was the buses and there was other public systems that had opened, they just ran away because they were not able to even afford food. सो अधिकतर लोग पलायन कर लिए, एक राज्य से दूसरे राज्य चले गए, बम्बई, दिल्ली, कलकत्ता। यहाँ कुछ यहाँ कुछ काम ही नहीं मिल रहा था 2-3 महीने से। अभी मुझे कुछ लोग कॉल करके पूछते हैं कि हम वापस आ सकते हैं क्या? So we see that even after months of lockdown, people were still facing the impact of it. So another point would be that we have seen that there has been a rise in the gender-based violence uh, in home as well as beyond. In one of the articles, as per Hindu, the National Commission for Women stated that almost 86% of women who had experienced violence never sought help, while 77% of the victims did not even mention the incidents to anyone. So while we had seen that there was gender-based violence and intimate partner violence happening across the globe, what the pandemic did was that it forced women to come and stay in close quarter with probably people who were actually meting out this violence, and there was no way for them to actually seek help because proper support structures were not in place. We also saw that sexual violence and harassment was happening in quarantine centers, isolation wards, prison health centers, and ambulances. So, in one of the interviews, we also found that a pregnant Adivasi woman who had gone to a community health center in Sarguja district with her mitanin. Mitanin is the colloquial term used in Chhattisgarh for Asha worker. She was tested COVID-19 positive, and then she was asked to be admitted to the medical college there. And later that night, when she was alone, there were not many people in that ward, and three people wearing PPE masks entered her room and asked her to come with her in a separate room for a checkup. They took her to a very dark room, and then she was asked to remove her clothes. And it was then when the woman realized that there must be something wrong happening, and she kind of started protesting, and that's when the men started attacking her, and the woman started screaming, and when she raised this alarm, the men fled. The woman later tried to file a complaint with the Mitan and to the CMHO, but no concrete action was taken. So this was just one of the incidents that I am speaking, but there were quite a few incidents that we had come across during our interviews. And we have to understand that these kind of incidents also influence a woman's decision in health seeking behavior. So if later on when we talk about like why do women uh, hesitate towards taking vaccine, or why can't they venture out on their own, we have to remember that their health seeking behavior is dependent upon several factors: their previous perceptions and experiences when they had gone for seeking care. We had seen that there was several denial of healthcare services cases coming up, and what we saw that especially during the first lockdown was that because the public health system services were rerouted to take care for COVID-19, several important services like sexual and reproductive healthcare services, antenatal checkup, which included antenatal checkup or abortion or contraception, had taken a complete backseat. So IPAS Foundation had modeled and found that almost 1.85 million abortions were likely compromised because of the lockdown. This is one data which is from April to June, actually, 2019, 20, and 2021. And we see that there has been a decline in the total ANC registered, as well as that there has been a decline of 19% in institutional deliveries. Uh, uh, I would also like to share one small another case study from the EAC study, where we found that Adivasi woman from Charma had got labor pains and she went for her delivery to the nearest PHC. The health worker there found her to be positive, but they did not admit her. They kept her waiting outside in the parking area, and it was December and very shivering. They did not want to touch her because of the stigma attached to the COVID disease. And she was asked to, she went to labor lying on that cold ground and had to give birth there. And only when after the delivery happened, they kind of, touched her and sent her to the isolation facility. But this entire incident where she was, discriminated and left alone, everything in pain, really impacted her mental health. And when she even came back after the isolation center, where she was, kept separated from her baby and she was not allowed to meet her baby for several days, women in her village and neighboring areas then who were pregnant were avoiding for going to, for institutional deliveries. They were opting to take home deliveries and even delaying the immunization because of the entire experience of this woman they had heard. So Sama had filed a PIL in the High Court, which was because of a similar kind of incident that happened in an urban area where a 25-year-old woman who was earlier getting complete antenatal checkup in a renowned hospital, public hospital in South Delhi, was denied care because her area was demarked as a red zone, and she was asked she neither she nor her entire family was COVID positive, but they were denied care for like almost 48 hours. And this was the reason behind Sabha's initiative to go forward and urge the High Court to reinstate facilities for pregnant and women. We see that there has been a wider impact on mothers and children in South Asia. So there has been like several deaths that have increased. There has been a spike in the maternal deaths, a huge amount, 3.5 million additional unintended pregnancies. And this is just a small glimpse of what has happened. So another important factor is that we had seen, especially hitting people of vulnerable and marginalized groups, was that the livelihood factor. So I wanted to highlight, this was a study that has been recently published by Azim Premji University, and they kind of show that in terms of men, we see that while 60.6% men had no effect, like they did not lose work during lockdown or after. We can't say the same thing about women, which is only 18.7%. And while only 7% men lost work during lockdown and could not recover, like could not find another kind of job by December 2020, around 46.6% women were not able to recover. So they were so in this case, mostly men had either shifted to self-employment, but women were not able to go back to any kind of work. So what's the reason why do we need to talk about gender gap in vaccines? So when we talk about healthcare workforce, we know that almost 70% of the workforce is women. And while they earn almost 28% less than men and hold only 25% of leadership positions, they remain concentrated into lower statuses, frontline health workers, and they are often paid very low. Their recognition is less. They have to face harsher realities of gender pay gap and gender bias. And we also saw how even during our vaccination drive that they were the ones who were first asked to take the vaccination. But in terms of which I would also talk later about, in terms of transparency or keeping them, providing them with all kind of an information, the system did not take uh, several steps. So we also see that the burden of care is usually on women. So when we talk about the gendered impact of the pandemic, we know that the women had to take up more burden of the domestic work apart from, even if they were employed. And informal workers had to lose their job, as we saw in the earlier slide. So according to an India working survey conducted in Karnataka and Rajasthan, the proportion of working women who spent more than 2 hours a day cooking went up from 20% to almost 62% in Karnataka. And the same went from 12 to 58% in Rajasthan. So when we talk about an equitable and just world, we have to understand that our policies also need to have a gender responsive approach. It cannot be gender blind. This is one of posters from People's Vaccine Alliance campaign, and I feel that this kind of shows the gaping disparity that exists. So for every one vaccine that is being administered in a low income country, 117 are being given in a high income country. So here is another graph where we can see the disparity between the global north versus global south. And when we see the share of people who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19, the share is much, much higher in countries like United Kingdom, United States, or Germany. And we also know, like in countries like Israel, there is being now given a third booster dose. So while there are highly developed countries continue to stockpile vaccines. Countries in Asia or South Africa, low middle income countries are grappling because of shortage of vaccines. And we see that the share of fully vaccinated is way, way lower. So it's also being termed as vaccine apartheid, which has been going around because we know that there are vaccines that are there in highly developed countries which are getting wasted, while countries in the global south are struggling for the basic for the bare minimum. So this is another slide that kind of shows how when we talk about fully vaccinated people, so see that United Kingdom is getting like 121. It's because the COVID vaccine requires multiple doses. So per 100%, we can see that Nepal, there are only 14 people who have been vaccinated. In India, it's only 30, while in Kenya it's only 3, and Uganda it's 2. So yeah, so one of the when I was talking to one of my friends in Kenya, and she was talking about how the public health system is so weak that in certain countries they do not even have the vaccine storage facility. So they are unable to even think, and they do not even have a vaccine manufacturing capacity, unlike India. And they are dependent upon countries like India or other nations to actually donate them. So there are these other large factors which we know and we constantly talk about, and we have to look at the reasons why, such as like growing privatizations or the pharma monopolies, and how they are dominating the entire market. So when we see that in countries for here instance in Bangladesh, when we see the same vaccine is price per dose is way more, so it's like $4, and the private market is selling it at $13. So when we leave a vaccine which is like an essential medicine to private monopoly or to open free markets, we then determine that who won't be able to access this medicine. So surely vulnerable and marginalized groups women and other people would be left behind in this race. This is another snapshot of how vaccines have been priced differently. And we do have to understand that there are larger forces at play. And somewhere the state has to come and take responsibility for it. And it cannot be left to private players that people would have to choose or people would have to pay from out of their own pockets, because that would definitely leave a huge section of the society behind. When we see, when I try to find sex disaggregated data on vaccination, unfortunately, there is not much available for India and even for countries from the global south. And mostly the countries that are here are actually France, Italy, and Germany or Canada. So, but we can see that the vaccination for at least one dose mostly the countries that are highly developed, they have been able to provide it for their females as well. The share is pretty uh, gender proportion. While in Bangladesh, more men have got the vaccinations in comparison to women. So the reason behind that, there is not, despite WHO urging all the countries to, you know, collect sex disaggregated data, because this is the minimum. The data is somewhere we will finally be able to understand how, how the gender responsive uh, approach was taken by different states for this pandemic. And that data, when it's not available, will be hampering the analysis of the entire pandemic. So for June, as of June 2021, we see only 52 countries out of 194 are reporting. So majority of the countries that are reporting are the North, global North, while we see that countries like, in Africa or in India do not have any sex disaggregated data. It's the same here. So for vaccinations, the African region or the Southeast Asian region do not have much data. Yeah. So uh, yeah. This is a one second.
Can all participants please mute their microphones?
Nilanjana, go ahead.
So yeah, sorry, yeah. In COVID, as per today's data, we see that there are only 3 categories that are available, which is the male, female, and the others. So as per today's data, for only 886 for every 1,000 males, only 886 females have got vaccinated. But another pressing concern is that for transgender or for any other vulnerable groups like homeless people, we do not have a concrete strategy. While some states have taken some measures to hold special drives for them, there has not been a concrete plan as to how we would go forward with vaccinating these vulnerable groups. And since there is no data present for them, there is no way of also tracking of how much have this section or these vulnerable groups have been left behind. We talk about vaccine hesitancy, and when we have been talking about to various women groups in the rural areas, they have been talking about how they have limited mobility to reach health facilities or vaccination sites. As we know that initially when the vaccination rollout was happening, it was necessary to register through CoWIN, and that was a huge barrier, because as we all know that several women in our country are still not able to have access to a mobile phone or to internet, and they do not even have access to financial resources. So in order to reach, if the vaccination center is not in 1 kilometer radius of their village, it is almost impossible for them to actually leave either their kids behind, or they have to ask their husbands to basically drop them. And even their own health seeking decision, like even their own health decisions, they are it's dependent upon the entire family. So the restricted decision making power, and factors like, the lack of clinical trial data, which we have seen that only recently ICMR has come up with the change. We see that has been some of the few important factors why women have been lagging behind. We had also seen how there have been several rumors and misconceptions about vaccine safety. So in the middle, there was this entire thread of rumor going around that if women take this vaccine, they'll have some damage to their reproductive ability, or they should not be taking it during their periods. And as part of Sama, we have also been holding workshops to, to provide information about vaccine and its safety and efficacy. So one of the important things that we do believe is that there has to be clear, transparent information provided to the people, even in terms of the adverse events that are taking place. So just because some vaccines or any vaccine would have some adverse effect, that data should not be hidden from people. People should have access to complete data, whether it's beneficial or non-beneficial, and then let them decide whether their course of action. So instead of using coercive methods where there have been instances that you have to take vaccine, or you would not be given PDS, or you would not be given access to a particular social scheme, there has to be a alternative method of letting people provide the information and then letting them decide. So we had held a few consultations with frontline workers, and and this was majorly with women. So there were issues of remuneration and transparency in and anxiety and stress throughout this vaccination drive that was happening with frontline workers. So one of the major concerns that was flagged by the health workers was that uh, they were not informed properly. They were just simply asked to come and take the vaccination. And if they kind of did not agree to take the vaccination, they were threatened with certain uh, disincentives. So frontline workers felt that because they are at the bottom rung, they are being pushed to do that, because they were asked, like, along with the sanitation workers or the other workers, you need to first take it. And there was a lot of pressure for them. And even if there were cases of side effects, they were not asked, they were not given an option of, where to go or how to seek help. And that caused a lot of stress and anxiety, because they were also doing a lot of other work. They were facing a lot of harsh reaction from the community, because they had also been they have been involved in the COVID relief and other surveys. And there was also a lot of stress from their own homes, where they were asked to sleep separately. And despite all of this, they were continuing to do their work, but they expected that the vaccination uh, could have been more transparent, and they should have been treated as part of the system and not as a separate uh, voluntary worker. So as we spoke about certain gaps in the COVID-19 vaccination, the major hurdle was the digital divide that happened. So till the time there were walk-in registrations not happening, the CoWIN app was a huge barrier for a lot of people, not only for people who did not have access to internet and mobile phones, but even people having access to those resources were unable to do so. And there have to be efforts made to provide vaccinations at the nearest sub health centers and uh, primary health centers, and taking help of community health workers to have discussions at the ground level, at the village level. And the other thing being that everyone was asked to bring an identity proof. Most of the people did have identity proof, but women who did not have a husband, or persons with disability, or homeless and sex workers were definitely having issues in accessing vaccination. So there have been also uh, uh, a huge gap in understanding the perspective of the community. So while there has been a lot of misconceptions, and the cultural belief in India being that most people, the vaccinations are for children in rural areas, there was this, during our discussions we got to know that there was this belief that only children are supposed to take vaccinations, and not older people are supposed to take vaccination. So this entire belief that has been there had to be slowly removed instead of taking a coercive method. But that didn't happen. And as we have already spoken about intellectual property, which is a much, much larger debate, and I am no expert in that, but sharing of the intellectual property of vaccines is crucial, because and also letting the public sectors to develop it, because there has to be more people, and the huge population, like I think there was this we would need like several years to vaccinate, considering the huge population that is there in our country. So unless there are more efforts and global efforts to actually make this possible, we will still be looking at a very bleak future. And as we know, as the virus mutates, it is not going to help even those who are vaccinated. So data is lacking in the ways that the health and socioeconomic effects of COVID-19. And our understanding of the ways in which COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting women and girls is also hampered by, is also hampered by our, the traditional methods that we have been long been undertaking. So as I have already shown, that there has been very little attempt to, show disaggregated data, and even go beyond that in order to look at the intersectional factors. We need this data. We need to understand what is affecting the vulnerable and the marginalized classes. But in order to understand and have an in-depth view of it, we need to look at different methods. So on a positive note, I would like to end this thing that in we have to advocate for policy that is a gender has a gender balanced look. And we have to understand that when we talk about gender analysis, it is somewhat talking about how socially constructed rules and our gender identities are impacting, be it our health seeking behavior or our access to certain essential health and services. And so in order to when we are conceptualizing any kind of policy, it is very crucial countering the gender factor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nilanjana, for that very instructive session. And the data visualizations were like, it hits you, the reality just hits you in the face, and you realize that just how stark the problem is. So we shall now be embarking upon our Q&A session. Just to humbly reiterate, I shall be reading the questions and the comments from the chat box. So please type them there. Apart from that, you may also choose to actually ask your question, and I would request you to unmute. Then please keep the questions brief and to the point. Any more queries can be redirected to our website, 5elements.sdg@gmail.com. So to start off, I have a question asked anonymously. How can we combat the cultural and patriarchal stereotypes that influence the gender disparity on this topic, considering the lack of disaggregated data? Has the government provided any circular or guidelines on the topic?
Yeah. So I think there have been a lot of efforts that have been taking place as and when the vaccination was getting rolled out. I am actually not aware of any particular circular right now, but I will look into that. But the community health workers with whom we had spoken, they were talking about how they were getting offhanded information or some kind of a training later as to how to, talk to the people in their communities and spread awareness about it. But all of this happened very late. So, as I said, a lot of information was first available to those who only had access to, let's say, internet, because everything was supposed to be digitalized, which was the basic, huge, glaring gap. But as we have seen in our past experiences, and also if we take note from our past immunization programs, community health workers and our public health systems can be strengthened to effectively tackle these issues, because this is a long process, as we have seen that in several rural areas, especially because in certain, in those cases they have been more rigid, and sometimes they do not have access to information. So in those cases, community health workers and the public health systems have to be more prepared in order to allow to be provided information, and then over the time probably we'll be able to see a change.
So this is a question from my side. I have been doing a lot of reading about migration and reverse migration. So the impact of seasonal migration on workers during the pandemic was manifest for all to see. The entire world saw what a disaster it was, a humanitarian disaster of epic proportions. So what kind of, as a public health professional, what kinds of reforms do you suggest to make the policy more universalized, so that it's not based on the site of registration of a particular person? So for example, you're registered at one place and then you migrate and then you don't have access to services on the other place. So do you think that the federal structure will be compromised, or do you think that there's a better way to do it when it comes to healthcare services?
Yeah, I think that's like a valid question which has been happening. Like, we also saw in terms of especially like HIV patients, who were registered in if let's say in one place and then they kind of migrated to another place, they were facing a lot of issues because they needed those medicines which were very important. And then there was I would say it is also somewhat responsible because so a lot of our programs are vertical. So when we talk about in public health, which is why there has been less communication amongst the departments. So a lot of this kind of happened after these problems cropped up. So as you rightly said, we do have to have like a more universal approach. It should not be limited to, let's say, any kind of a identity document. So let's say if I'm a person who has migrated, but if I am going to a public health center, I should be able to access it without having to prove I am not, just because I'm not from this place, I do not get this service. On paper that should not have happened, but we have seen several instances where identity proof like Aadhaar card becomes mandatory for accessing any kind of a social scheme. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. You talked a lot about the community health centers and their central role in delivery of healthcare services. So under the neoliberal system, essentially, public provisioning of public goods has been, sort of displaced or replaced by philanthropic system, right? So where there are CSRs doing all this work, which should not be happening. So these are public goods and it should be provided by the government. Technically speaking. But when it comes to CSR, what do you think the reforms in CSR and the things that they should focus on when it comes to ASHA workers? Because we saw during the pandemic how drastically they were affected. They were neglected and undercompensated, and yet they were doing the most critical work, and they are doing the most critical work. So, like, if you could suggest some reforms when it comes to the ASHA system and the ASHA workers.
So we have been part of People's Health Movement, and Jan Swasth Abhiyan, which is the Indian chapter, has been raising demands with for the community health workers for a long time. And apart from the fact that there have been demands for the remuneration and social security benefits, which was definitely lacking and something that they had been demanding. Their apparent status of voluntary health worker and has also affected their position in the health system. Uh, but one of the main things that I do feel about community health workers is that they often talk about how them doing like a lot of work, but then they are not respected in the health system. So that's one of the main things that they want, that they are looking for proper remuneration, definitely, for the work that they're doing. It should not be based on certain incentive activities only. As we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, the other health services had completely got halted. So let's say if they were not taking a pregnant woman for a delivery, they were not able to get that incentive amount, but they were doing the COVID work for which they were supposed to receive a particular amount from the government. But that amount also they didn't get in several states. And for instance, in Chhattisgarh, they got it only for 1 month. For 3 months, they were not able to get that amount. So their their the amount of work that they do, they need to be reimbursed properly for that, and it should not be based on only particular tasks. It should not be seen as an incentive based performance like that. And social security benefits also need to be there, and there has to be also a trajectory for them, right, to grow. Like if they want to become, in certain cases we had seen that they have been able to take the A&M courses and then become an A&M. So they also see that they are rising in the health system. They should be treated as part of the health system, and not just someone who is a voluntary health worker. So yeah.
So you're talking about cultural acknowledgement. And for the benefit of the audience, A&M means auxiliary nurse midwives. So they assist in births. So, yeah.
Not just cultural acknowledgement, but yeah, like they are an essential part of the public health system, and they should be seen like that, and not just attributed as a voluntary health worker. So their role in the health system is also a much larger one, but they are not neither reimbursed nor acknowledged for it. So both of those things, they have to be provided the social security benefits like how we do for any other public health servant. And yeah, their role has to be also acknowledged, and they also need to rise, like they need to have a trajectory upwards in the public health system like any other worker would want. So yeah.
Yes. Please ask your questions in the chat box. And Shreya, Arun, do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, if I may ask a question of Nilanjana, first of all, thanks a lot for that very well researched, very informative presentation with a lot of data. Thank you. It's quite understandable that during a crisis such as what we are going through in this pandemic, the fault lines are more exposed. We've seen the issues that we have in society. That I think is understandable. Are there possibilities, opportunities to shift public perception and awareness, or to make changes in societal values on gender during such a crisis as well? Does that offer any opportunities for us to act and to make a difference?
Thank you, Arun. That was actually a very interesting question. It is something I have also been pondering upon. We have been lately having discussions about, how past pandemics have affected and what has been their role. And I have also been trying to understand what has been the role of past pandemics and COVID-19. And I think that kind of opens up discussions for how we have seen, like, while Zika and Ebola had some direct impact on like women, and we saw that, and that kind of opened up the question. COVID-19, while had like a much global impact, it has been a crucial turning point for a lot of people to actually focus on these issues. So while we saw that there have been a global rise in the violence against women, and there have been other issues that have been taken forth, like we are now talking about how healthcare workers, especially the frontline workers, need to be properly paid, reimbursed. So I think the pandemic has at least forced us, and especially for, I think, for us, like, if we just talk about the second wave, and we saw the huge crisis in the October that was happening, and people were scrambling here and there, and people were looking for looking towards online media, social media, to look for help, rather than having to look for their own from systemic help. There was nothing available. So I think all these experiences should not be forgotten. I think something that has happened in past pandemics, and there was this one person, Prashant Kidambi, who was talking, like, when the Bombay plague happened, people forgot, like, after a few years, there was this fatigue, and people forgot that how devastated and crushed they were, or what a kind of injustices were happening. And I think we should not forget, because I think recently the central government kind of said in the parliament that there was like, no one died because of oxygen shortage. So that completely shows the apathy, and we should not forget. So while there has been this constant I would say narrative of that public health systems cannot take care of a pandemic. We have seen that when the lockdown first happened, the private health systems were completely shut down, and the public health systems were asked to gear up and set up the isolation facilities and the quarantine centers. So I think that with the right kind of investment, and with the public engagement and the political will, things can change. We can have like a better health system. But yeah, we should not forget what all has happened uh, during uh, this tragedy. Yeah.
Okay, but there are a lot of conditions for that. Huh? You said public engagement, political will, and
Yeah.
without that, you don't see that happening. Yeah, we need to leverage this, and we need to keep the momentum going. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions before we deliver the vote of thanks? Brilliant. With this, we come to the end of this webinar on
One
gender
more
inequality.
question. One more
Oh, yeah,
question,
sure,
if
sure,
I
sure.
may.
Go ahead.
Now,
Go ahead.
see, we are not alone in this. Yeah, on the one hand, you spoke about the vaccine apartheid and all that. But on the other hand, this has also underlined and emphasized to what extent we are connected internationally. It's a global pandemic. Travel has been disrupted. We keep our vaccines, and then others start screaming that they don't get their vaccines. We're all connected in this. Has that been evident in your work? To what extent are we part of an international community, and to what extent is there a potential for cross learning? UN has been saying, this you need to watch about domestic violence, this and that. So UN is picking up these things, but is that resulting in engagement across borders? In South Asia, for example, within BRICS, I don't know. There has to be some common denominator when you reach out across borders, and or are we too focused at the crisis right in front of us, not even to speak to others and to engage with others?
Yeah, I do believe there is like there is a momentum going on, and people, movements, be it people's movements or feminist movements and civil societies, are trying to engage. And we have also, as part of Sama, been trying to engage with our networks and friends from South Asia. And it's only then we kind of get to know about so many intricacies and nuances that have been going on. So let's say the ACT accelerator, which was or international mechanisms like COVAX, which has been set up so that there is an equitable distribution of vaccines. So one of the key issues that are one of the speakers in our last session kind of pointed out was FIFA spoke about how there is no representation from the low middle income countries in these COVAX facility or ACT. So when there is no representation from the global south, let's say, how do you expect that we'll be able to decolonize that kind of a system? So it's only by sharing we get to know what is actually going on, and we also get to know how much we often tend to forget, as you rightly pointed out, we don't connect with our members of our South Asian partners. But we have been recently talking to a lot of people from Nepal and Bangladesh and Pakistan and so on, Sri Lanka, and we get to know that so many things that are happening in their country and our country is very much related because of the colonization thing. So there is this colonization of the vaccines and the mechanisms that are being played out, because of which there are certain countries that are being left out, and we need to come together. We need to talk, we need to engage, we need to keep this momentum, we need to take this momentum forward, and I think then only there will be some kind of a shift in the power dynamics.
If I could just make one very brief comment, I was thinking about it as you were saying, like how activism has increased. So in the 19th century and earlier 20th century, and even like in the 30th century, plague and so on and so forth, I think pandemics were treated as either an act of God, or they are like, we were not equipped when it comes to like medicines and stuff. But now pandemics are a political failure, because scientifically within 2 weeks we could know what the virus was, what strain it was, and then we started vaccine production. So I think the blame is shifting from science to politics, and people like to talk about politics much more than they would like to talk about science. Politics is that much interesting. That's why wars are more interesting than the plague, right? So Spanish flu, a lot of people died, more people than World War II. But people like to talk about World War II and not about Spanish flu, because Spanish flu was treated as an act of God. So I think, that's why there is more activism when it comes to COVID, because it's a political failure. Our politicians have failed us. The policy has failed us, and not the scientific element of it, I think. So if you could comment on that.
I think a lot of people across the globe, like even how Arun said, like in this age of technology, when they were able to extract the RNA, or they were able to even come up with the vaccine so fast. I think that itself is such a huge feat. But despite all of that, we see that there is this huge gap, and that is why people are kind of talking about the inequity that is existing, because despite the scientists doing their work, the technology coming, the medicine coming to our rescue, people are still not able to access, right? So the reason for not being able to access is not just medical or scientific. There are other factors involved. So there are, as you lightly said, probably why people would like to talk about wars, but then why are we not able to access vaccines? Okay, so why are there countries which are able to get their entire population vaccinated and still have a surplus, and still not willing to share, or still not willing to donate, or we are supposed to be dependent on them for help? So these questions kind of continue to, I think, ponder over our heads, which leads to other questions as well. Yeah.
Yes, very interesting. Um, such an informative session. I'm learning a lot. So I think our participants have left a couple of very nice comments. So Chetna Iyer says very interesting data and well put together, Nilanjana. And then Ayush Gandhi says very interesting session, Nilanjana, cleared a lot of doubts and data visualization helped to understand the current situation. The point about acknowledging the work of community health workers was so important. Thank you. So,
thank you, Chetna and Ayushi.
So with this, we come to the end of this webinar on gender inequality in access to COVID vaccines. It is a privilege to present a vote of thanks on behalf of my team at 5 Elements. Thank you so much, Nilanjana, for taking out time out of your extremely busy schedule to address us on such a crucial topic with loads of data. Would expect nothing less from you. Research rigor is what we are known for, this alumnus. And so thank you so much. We are also very grateful for our audience for their participation and enthusiasm and in making this a unique learning experience. So please come back next month. On the 8th of every month, we have this webinar. It was shifted to the 9th this month because 8th was a Sunday. So 8th of every month at 8 p.m. As we bring back some other thought leader or some other academic leader from around the world, they're discussing about gender issues. Thank you.